I wanted to share some stories with you guys, all right? I think I've shared with many of you that 10 years ago when I did some business coaching, my key strengths were identified as a great executor, a pretty good relationship builder, and an okay strategic thinker, but I had zero influence. I realized that influential people tell a good story. And so over the last 10 years, I've been trying to become a better influencer. And so I try and share stories of myself, my life, family, professional life, but also stories of things that I read in books, podcasts, just constantly trying to consume content, right? Every one of us has a personal story. And today I'm going to share with you my personal story, because you'll understand that with my story, many of you don't know really my background and everything that's happened in my life, but you'll then understand why I have this big vision, what my purpose is, and how I actually led to discovering that purpose personally. While it sounds like I'm going to be talking about myself for a whole bunch of the time, it's actually to share with you why Key Health's vision is what it is, and what I want for you guys personally, and what your stories are, what I want them to become. Our stories help shape us. They shape the way we think. They shape our mindset. They shape the next action we take. Why is it important? And let me answer the question by sharing my story. Many of you know that I was born in Egypt. I came to Australia when I was 4 years old. All right. The way I got here was that my parents grew up in Egypt. We have a very, very rich ancestry in Egypt of generations upon generations. Our family have an entrepreneurial bloodline that is very strange in that they were very big farmland owners. Transportation, to some degree, in the new age of industrial revolution, became, industrially minded, property minded, construction, all that sort of stuff. And so my parents both had an amazing foundation and place to live. In the 70s in Egypt, the king of Egypt, who kind of was like the king or queen of England, in that it was a monarchy, but there was a democratic government in place. There was a very strong influx of Middle Eastern countries coming into Egypt and pushing extreme religious views into Egypt. And it changed the complete dynamic or paradigm of Egypt. My parents went from having friends who were Jewish, Muslim, obviously our family are Christians, and sleeping at each other's house, playing together, to you don't talk to them, you don't have anything to do with them. And so there became this kind of hatred between the different sects and religions. And my dad hated it because his best mates he couldn't hang out with anymore. And he decided that very early in his teens, as soon as he finished school, he would get out of the country. And so he did. He skipped town to not have to do his compulsory military service, and he went to Holland. He backpacked around Holland, worked really hard, earned a bit of money, got a taste for Western culture, and decided, I can't stay in Egypt. I've got a family. I've got my parents who are getting older. I've got younger siblings. He was the eldest. My dad comes back, gets roped into the military. He had a horrible time. He was very rebellious, and I guess I got that from my dad. And that he essentially was put in military prison many times for leaving camp and going home, showering, having his mum's food for dinner, and then sneaking back in at 5 a.m. in the morning to the barracks and stuff. And he got caught many times. And so he hated the oppression. At this point, he hadn't met my mum, but both my mum and himself had amazing grades and would have been able to choose whatever career they wanted. But because in Egypt, you must identify your ID with your religion, you can't get into anything without very clearly being selected based on religion. It's a very strong decision-making process. Sorry to say this, but it would be like you could get into the top university in Australia, but you got into the worst TAFE because you were not an Islamic person, you were a Christian. My dad was a mathematics teacher, my mum was a science teacher. They heard along the grapevine that there's a country, Australia, that's wanting skilled migrants to come over here in the late 80s and 90s. And for many of you who are old enough, I'm sure Tristan knows that there was a big recession in the late 80s, early 90s, and it was a really tough time in Australia but they were now trying to stimulate the economy and bring over skilled migrants. My dad spent all his money. By this point, they're married. They've got my brother and I. They hate the oppression. They hate the life there. And they decide, right, we're going to pack our bags and go. Spend all their money on a ticket. My grandfather did not want to participate in the family wealth because there was a lot of infighting amongst the family of inheriting different parts of the wealth. So he actually was a very respected leader in his community, and he just gave most of his money to the poor and did a lot of community service. My dad basically said we landed with our suitcases and we didn't even know where we were going to sleep that night in Australia. When we get here, we found a desk that was essentially like the Airbnb of the olden days, which, was just to try and find a place to stay. The truth is that for many years, I really struggled with language, with culture. And I can tell you that Australia is no longer a racist country, but back then it was horrible. It was really bad as a young brown kid in a white culture. And also the stigmatism was that, everything my parents spoke about was our Orthodox Christian faith. And when I tried to talk to my friends about going to church, that didn't really fly well. So this is us when we landed in Australia. My dad with his big mo, and me in some overall, I don't know what that is, but this last picture, I'm sharing this because I remember it distinctly. I don't want to harp on this too long, but this teacher was one of the most racist people I've ever met in my life. And she single-handedly made me stand away from the classroom in this photo. And I remember this, and I remember thinking, why am I being pushed out to the side of the photo here? When you remember those moments in life, they tend to drive you in moments of difficulty and struggle. Then the chip comes, right? The racism, the doubters, the struggles, okay? We finally get our citizenship in '94. I'm so proud that I'm Australian now. I think I'm one of the boys. I can be considered a white kid now. Because of the sort of starting school at a later stage, English not being my first language. I remember teacher interviews, they used to tell my parents that he's speaking gibberish. He's stuck between the two languages, and often it doesn't even make sense. Delayed learning, delayed intellect, real big struggles. Going to a good school was really important to my parents, and they basically spent every dollar they had about trying to getting us into good schools. I had bad grades, I was misbehaved, and when I tried to get into this school, I was basically knocked back. I remember that moment where they kicked me out of the room, and I could hear them telling my parents that there was no way we're accepting your son into this school. They saw my report card, and then they thought they'll interview me, and after the interview, they pretty much said, we can't have him in this school. What's really interesting is that I got accepted into this boys' school. I just love the place. They're starting to get involved in sport and whatever. And I get to senior years, and I finally taste the feeling of being a leader because my peers voted me to be a house captain. I realized that, wow, people actually view me as a leader. That's shocking. I went from this kid that no one wanted to hang out with to a leader. You might not be able to see that, but I've got this special badge on and a second emblem on my pocket that I was a house captain. Very proud moment. Honestly, I finished school and I was still very, very immature. Because my parents worked so hard, they weren't around a lot, to be fully truthful. They were very loving, they gave us everything, but they weren't around a lot. So, I missed out on looking to them to learn the lessons of inhibition, delayed gratification, making good decisions, thinking things through. What that resulted in was a highly driven, testosterone-driven 18-year-old guy who basically thought he was about to conquer the world, being cocky, being arrogant, but also driving like an idiot. And many of you may have never seen this, but I did this to myself. So at night, 2 days before my 19th birthday, I wrapped a car around the pole like this. I should have never walked out. I was stretchered out. I should have died that day. With some sort of miracle, my leg was crushed. I had some head swelling and whatever, but I survived. Many of you asked me, why are you limping? I never really share it with you guys, but the truth is that I have a permanent disability from that car accident, in that I have zero function from my knee down of my right leg, which is why I limp around sometimes, which is, you know, why I don't necessarily participate in the active movement activities that we sometimes do. I spent 6 months in a hospital bed. I was in uni at the time, and I kind of decided that my past is my past. I don't want to live an average life anymore because I'm alive and I should have died. I had no memory of this, by the way, but when you see the photo, you think, what the hell? Like, what did I do? And how did I walk out of it? But it gives you this kind of renewed sense of like, holy crap, I've got a second life here. I don't think I've got a third one, but I definitely have a second one. So I finished uni, worked really hard, became a really good osteopath. It wasn't enough. I kind of wanted to keep striving for more. You know, I had this Shoshin mentality that I keep telling you guys about. Like, it's never enough. I'm constantly trying to improve and advance and get better. Did my Masters of Physio, and I worked full time at the same time. It was like a 60, 70 hour weeks. You know, I'd be at lectures in the morning, seeing patients till 9 o'clock at night, studying till late in the evening, doing it all over again. I remember like meeting many of my peers, young and old, because, you know, there was the students who'd just come from an undergrad, and there was the students who'd come back to do this Masters. And what I realized was that everyone complained about just being at uni for 20 hours a week, while, you know, I was working and at uni 60, 70 hour weeks and loving it. And kind of like, it was like a fire in my belly. And then I realized I was built differently, both from experiences, but maybe something in my genetics, I don't know, maybe in my bloodline. I finished my Masters. I skipped my graduation ceremony because it was the day we opened Key Health, and I wasn't going to graduation ceremony. This is what I wanted to do. This is the dream. I was here on settlement day rather than university accepting some award. I told them to post it to me because it meant nothing to me. It was about constant advancement. I'd already done that. It was like a chapter closed. It was the next chapter now. Very soon after starting Key Health, I married my amazing wife, Maria, who some of you may have not met, some of the newer faces, but she'll be here later today. We buy a home together, and then this thing called COVID hits.